What's going on, everybody? It's your boy KRYPTONIAN saying here, bringing you guys another Chainsaw Man chapter review for Chainsaw Man chapter 109. And after last week's chapter, where it looked like one of the four horsemen of devil showed up, things have now taken a turn for the unexpected, much as the case like what you would expect with Chainsaw Man in general. Between our horny protagonist Denji showing up and the mysterious devil who was posing as a schoolgirl last chapter being nowhere to be found, something that we need to keep our eyes on moving forward, we have a lot to talk about. Even though this was an action-packed chapter itself, there's still quite a bit to actually go over. So as always, we'll get into a brief recap as we unravel more of the information that we have in the chapter itself. Now, the chapter opens up with the Justice Devil Yuko continuing her rampage that we saw in the last chapter, and right away the brilliance of what Fujimoto did here is just downright amazing when you look at it. So we see crows yet again shown on a panel that is associated with Yuko, which is another way of showing that you have setting that's being used as a way to foreshadow Yuko's death. Crows in Japanese symbolize rebirth and rejuvenation, and in the last chapter, Yuko was dying only to be reborn by the acts of what we can assume was either the Death Devil or the Famine Devil, which makes it very fitting since it's the first time we've seen in this chapter from Yuko's perspective that she's looking up at crows itself. However, those who will be reborn will eventually end up dying again because that whole cycle is samsara, life, death, rebirth, and that whole cycle, which is actually what happens at the end of the chapter itself, which that's also a nice nod to the fact that this is a very Western-like thing to do in the sense of Yuko's basically a school shooter, and in Western societies, crows are often associated with death. So either interpretation that you go with, depending on how you look at it, this definitely works here. So while she's undergoing her rampage, Yuko makes it a point to take out the devil hunters who showed up on the site in order to take her down, but Yuko kills them like it's nothing and eventually turns her eyes towards a young girl who mistakenly thinks it's responsible for Asa Mitaka being harmed. However, we can draw two brilliant conclusions about this moment with Yuko. Did the missing devil do something to Mitaka, which I think is a lot less likely, or did Yuko in a rage in the end of the last chapter knock out Mitaka? I think that's more the case here. She wanted so desperately to become someone who could help Mitaka by getting rid of the bullies who made her life hard for her, that Yuko ended up harming Mitaka and knocking her unconscious. Justice is blind. The justice devil is drawn with no eyes. Justice system can be hypocritical, and sometimes injustice is turned an eye to in the name of the greater justice itself, which for Yuko, the injustice is that she herself might have been responsible for Mitaka's condition, but she thinks by getting rid of the bullies and potentially even the schools themselves that that's going to be enough links to justify what she's gone through. However, there's just one thing she didn't count on: our horny main character Denji showing up ready and willing to expose his cover. You have to believe that part of the reason why Denji did this wasn't just because there was a giant devil on the loose like he said, or that there was a half-naked Asa Mitaka a few feet away from him. It was more so likely that he heard a female screaming and saw an opportunity to transform in front of her, play it cool, and be the hero by transforming into the Chainsaw Man in front of her, because our boy has progressed from wanting to touch some boobs in part 1 of Chainsaw Man to letting women sit on him like a chair to now all of a sudden wanting to go all the way home to do adult things with whatever female will let him do so. After Denji transforms, putting on a show for the female student who sees him in battle, Denji does what Denji does best, which is use his horny motivations to kick some serious devil ass. And Yuko quickly learns that when it comes to Denji, reading his mind isn't gonna work. Denji isn't thinking about his next move. There's no super well thought out complicated plan. He's only thinking about how to use the battle to expose his true identity so he can get laid, and do so in a way to where it looks like it's natural. That way Yoshida can't get mad at him. It really reminds me of the speech that Whis gave in Dragon Ball Super when speaking of Goku maintaining Ultra Instinct and how Goku's mind was cleared and he focused only on the battle itself and not overthinking things in the way that one could do when they're locked in a battle. For Denji, this isn't Ultra Instinct so much as this horny instinct, and he's focused mostly on making sure that he accomplishes the goals of his pervy little heart. This ends up being bad news for Yuko, who becomes the latest devil to be slain by Denji. We then get an absolutely gorgeous set of panels, in my opinion, that flow together, showing us Mitaka on the ground and coming to and looking around before she picks herself up off the ground. And as we see her shadow, I love the fact that Fujimoto places a lot of emphasis on her shadow being extremely dark, whereas the panels before that were whited out, showing the contrast between Mitaka being being the light and Yoru being the darkness. And I love this because it shows us the foreshadowing that Mitaka is giving way to Yoru. And when we look closely at Yoru, when she calls out the Chainsaw Man, we see the eyes change and the scars on her face appear, showing us that this is actually Yoru talking. While I can see some people looking at those Mitaka panels and going, bruh, there's no background here, I think this choice is intentional, just given the shift that we see to Yoru on the next page. Fujimoto wouldn't be the first mangaka to forego backgrounds in certain scenes like this to put emphasis on the characters right before a reveal like this. Now, if you see backgrounds in the physical manga volume, then that was just Fujimoto ran out of time and that need to be corrected for the physical manga volume. I don't think that's the case. It's the small details like this that really make me love Chainsaw Man as much as I do, because you see on the prior panels how Mitaka's eyes are black, but once Yoru takes over, she has the same ring-shaped eyes that you saw with Makima and the mysterious devil who showed up in the last chapter. Even if Yoru didn't have the scars on her face, the eyes changing was enough of a giveaway. This does lead to a big question. What does Yoru do now that she's in front of Denji? And is Denji stupid enough to transform back into his regular appearance? I guess the better question here would be, as far as Denji is concerned, is the man horny enough to change back into his regular form? God, with Yoru standing there in front of him with those bra and panties, I wouldn't put it past him. He's horny enough to do it, and narratively, if he does so, Yoru now has a face to attach to Chainsaw Man. However, on the other hand, Yoru knows that she's too weak to fight Chainsaw Man as she currently is, and the whole purpose of wanting to make weapons in order to grow stronger so she can eventually take down Chainsaw Man. Sure, she could use a weapon that Mitaka made, but I seriously doubt it's strong to kill Denji like Yoru would actually want. If I had to guess, I'd say this would be around the time that Yoshida shows up to keep Denji from doing something stupid, and Yoru takes the time afterwards to turn Yuko into a weapon now that Denji's killed her. Narratively, that makes a lot more sense because of where she is right now. Yoru isn't strong enough to take on Denji. There's more to this from a setup perspective. Otherwise, Yoshida making contact with Denji was all for naught. I think at some point we will see Denji expose himself to Yoru / Mitaka, but I don't think now's the time to do so. As a Chainsaw Man fan, I love seeing the same trend that we saw in part 1, where nameless professional devil hunters and Chainsaw Man are about as useless as No Name Anbu from the Naruto manga. They get yeeted on sight, and I love seeing that. However, again, I'm pleased with the chapter we got here. I love the cliffhanger we got. It makes me think, given how things ended, we might be in for another Chainsaw Man plot twist where Fujimoto does something that we don't expect at the start of the next chapter, considering we now have to account for that missing devil from before. So my chapter question to you guys is, what do you think Denji would do next? While you think that over, consider watching these other Chainsaw Man videos you see on the screen right now.